Good evening and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. I am Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, my guest is the former chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party's Indigenous Caucus, Seth Sturm. Seth, go ahead and tell our guests about yourself.
Well, my name is Seth Sturm. I was the first chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party's Indigenous Caucus. Now, a little bit of backstory: we were the 14th Indigenous Caucus for any state party in the country for the Democrats. When we started, it was something that was exciting. We had a lot of momentum behind us, and it seemingly was going well. And just over the course of the past year, we've experienced a lot of racism within the party, and the work that we did has been sidetracked by a lot of it. And so, just recently, just last night, as a matter of fact, we decided to dissolve our caucus. All the members involved, all the people in the executive committee, the executive board, we resigned, and that's what's kind of brought me here. But like, my backstory is that I started out in politics in 2016. I was new, relatively young, and my sister's friend, Mary Ann Cleater, decided she wanted to run for state auditor in West Virginia. She had worked for the state auditor's office for 22 years, had to take care of her sick son, was forced to leave the office, but thought she could run it. So we ran this campaign. And everyone told us we couldn't win. This was 2016. We were complete outsiders. And she was this Black woman just going out there, and we were making videos. We were trying everything we could to get her to be in the public light. And we beat the establishment candidate, the person handpicked by Joe Manchin, in the primary, and she became the first African American to win a statewide contested primary in West Virginia. So just by virtue of that win, she kind of established herself as somebody to know in West Virginia politics. And, I've just always been there to help her. We came into this, both of us completely political novice, green as we came into this. And we just learned a lot over the 6 years that it's been since we started. And kind of coming in from the outside to see how the sausage is made on the inside, you have this perspective, and it really shifts the way that you look at things. I went from being somebody who bought into everything, like the Democrats are the party. We got to support the Democrats. They're the ones who are going to be there for us. But as it turns out, these people are the ones who have done some of the most harm to me personally, to my family, and to the Indigenous community here in West Virginia. So,
politics is a dirty business, as they say. I know what it's like to see a little of the sausage as far as elections go and primaries. In 2020, I was working with a lot of primary challengers in the Democratic Party, mostly on social media. And people would say things like they offered me a guaranteed city council seat if I dropped out, so the city council president would win the congressional race. Or they offered me a sure nomination for county supervisor if I just let this person get the congressional nomination this time. And all this dirty stuff, trying to buy you off, scare you off, threaten you off any way they can.
Right. And a lot of it is completely fake too. They don't mean it. They will never follow through with those promises. It's just a way to distract you. And I see a lot of that even in what I'm trying to do. I get a lot of attacks that are in bad faith, weird letters that have come to me, addressed to me, that I think they serve as a distraction to keep trying to throw me off of my main focus, which is trying to speak out about what I'm seeing within the party, because I came in specifically to do this Indigenous Caucus and to help lead it because they said there was nobody to do it. So that's what I wanted to do, was prove them wrong and show that we could get a strong group of people together who are truly indigenous and have our voice be heard. And the whole story from there just went south. But we started out with a strong group of, I would say at the very beginning we had maybe a dozen indigenous people, and the attacks that we faced from just my speaking up, my being vocal in the affirmative action committee, which is kind of ancillary to our diversity caucus. We had our own diversity caucus where we did our own thing. And then we also went into the affirmative action committee where we were tasked with making an affirmative action plan. The work I did at the caucus was great. The work we did as a caucus, everything that we did, I'm proud of. We did a lot of really good things. But the AAC, the Affirmative Action Committee, the majority of the diversity caucuses are white. And I'm not saying that they're not legitimate diversity caucuses, but these certain people within this group discriminated openly against the Black and Indigenous chairs. The language they use, there's microaggressions and then there's outright aggressive behavior. And it just evolved. I was called names. You're not a nice person. I will not engage with you because you're a monster. I've had at least 3 different people call the police on me. And this is all from just trying to represent my caucus, the indigenous people, and have our voice be heard and follow the mandate of the Democratic Party and what they tasked us with doing. So that kind of, I understand that some things get underhanded, but the level that they've come at me and my family and the people in my caucus, it's taken a turn to the personal, and it's dangerous what they're doing.
Let's start simple. Who is they?
Okay, so that's a good question. They, in this sense, are the new leadership of the Democratic Party in West Virginia. Now, there's a lot of news stories out there about this.
And I'll give everybody the news media version first, because somebody will hear this in the mainstream media, or they will hear this on progressive media that hasn't been talking to sources close to the ground, the way I've been trying to here. But what you will read in Politico or see on TYT or whomever is that a group of progressive insurgents took over the West Virginia Democratic Party and are poised to kick Joe Manchin out of his Senate seat in a few years. That's what we're supposed to believe from the media coverage. What's the truth, Seth?
That is what they want us to believe. I have been trying so hard to get the real story out there. So what happened is let me just go back to 2021, June 2021. I believe it was, the dates don't really matter. It was the beginning of June 2021 when the AAC was officially formed by the West Virginia Democratic Executive Committee. At this meeting, they presented, and by they I mean the leadership of the WVDP at the time, including Belinda Beafor, a few other, Robbie, I don't want to name names because I don't know them off. I don't want to name anybody who wasn't part of this. But Belinda Beafor got the most flack. So they presented this draft AA plan that they wanted to pass along with commissioning the Affirmative Action Committee and the Diversity Caucus, is making it all official, because there was a deadline. All of this started from an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, between a group of people that the DNC called the Reformers, and they had filed a lot of grievances against leadership of the West Virginia Democratic Party. So there was a Memorandum of Understanding that they would form this Affirmative Action Committee and these diversity caucuses as a way to appease these different grievances and for the party to seemingly move forward. So that's kind of where we got started and why these caucuses were formed in the first place. So they had a deadline from that Memorandum of Understanding. Now, that's why they've had to pass the draft AA plan. If they hadn't passed it, they would have been in violation and been in a lot of trouble with the DNC. I don't love internal politics, but that's what it was. And there was no input by any minorities in that draft AA plan. It was not a great plan. But there was an outcry that came after that from national media, from local media, and it was outrageous the amount of coverage that we got from that one executive committee meeting, and the outcry that the establishment of the Democratic Party is racist, which, okay, I do not disagree with that statement. But there has not been any follow-up to that story since that outrage. They platformed a lot of white progressives, I use the term loosely, reformers in the state who are working with, and they even quoted this. I don't want to get too into the weeds of it right away. So there was this outcry, and essentially the press covered this story in 2021.
That's what I was going to ask. This is 2021. This is the first attempt of the Affirmative Action Committee to do something, and the news coverage of how underhanded and how locked out all the actual Black and Indigenous people actually were from the process.
Right, which is true. The original draft plan that they had put forward was written by all white people. So that was the whole reason for the Affirmative Action Committee. Our only goal was to draft the Affirmative Action Plan, and to do that every so often. It was to be updated, I think, maybe even yearly. And so that was our main goal, was to get that done. When we came into this, there's so much to understand about the way that things were working. We came into this, specifically, I'm talking about Marianne Cleater, who I wish could have been with us tonight. I asked her, she was busy. But Marianne Cleater from the Black Caucus and me from the Indigenous Caucus, we wanted to be part of drafting the new plan, the Affirmative Action Plan. We wanted to be part of the process.
I mean, and I'll chime in here to say that makes sense, that the Black and Indigenous caucuses would have some hand in writing an affirmative action plan that in theory is supposed to advantage disadvantaged groups.
Well, and this is the thing. So my first meeting with the AAC was in August. I was elected in July, or I believe on July 6th, and then my first meeting with them was on August 17th. On August 17th, we made it so that I believe the language we passed was that subcommittee membership would be by volunteer status. You would just reach out to the chairs, and you could be on any subcommittee, because the whole point of the AAC was for us to draft this plan.
Of course.
So the idea kind of was anybody who wanted to be a part of that should be a part of that. They completely ignored that. They ignored all correspondence regarding that. They would not allow us to participate in any of the meetings. So Marianne Cleater, and this is why I wish Marianne would have been here. She's a lot more, she'll put up with a lot more than I will before she says anything. She can sit silently, whereas I can't. So she went to every meeting for the Planning and Bylaws Committee and was not allowed to participate, was not allowed to speak, but she watched. And in all of these meetings, they had this man, and I think that this is where I can bring him in. They had a man by the name of Harold Ickes sitting in, and he was an invited guest and supposedly an expert on affirmative action.
I know a Harold Ickes, Clinton administration.
Yes, Harold Ickes. This is a dynastic family. It goes way back. His father worked for FDR. He worked for Clinton, and this guy has a reputation as being kind of the guy who does Clinton's dirty work. New York Times called him Bill Clinton's garbage man in 1997, and then in 2007, when he's volunteering for Hillary's campaign, they're calling him Hillary's hammer. And in an interview, he said, "I jokingly refer to myself as the assistant sanitation manager," or something along those lines. So he knows what he is. He knows what he does. And this guy who's very tied to the Clintons, worth millions of dollars and doesn't live in West Virginia, had more input than any Black or Indigenous person in this new affirmative action plan. And the thing that gets me, none of the people who originally covered this story in 2021 will cover the follow-up. We'll say that the new plan sitting before the executive committee still doesn't include the voices of Black or Indigenous people that we were actually discriminated against, smeared, and it goes beyond even what we've talked about. That's just kind of what's happened professionally. And then the personal attacks that we've suffered at the hands of party insiders has been traumatizing, to be honest. And I mean, it's targeted against specifically Mary Ann Claytor, myself, and my sister, who's my co-chair for the Indigenous Caucus up until we dissolved it. And the lies and the vitriol that they would spread about each of us to just discredit us, and it was kind of death by 1,000 cuts. And the evidence that we would have to prove our innocence against what they're saying, they would never release. For instance, there was a meeting for I believe it was the bylaws committee, where Harold Ickes didn't realize Mary Ann Claytor was in the meeting, and he was speaking candidly, and he said that he had advised Selena Vickers, who at the time was the secretary for the AAC, a non-member. He had advised her on how to properly deal with the Sturms and others. And Mary Ann Claytor said so many, we started a campaign, release that video. We want that video. We know it was recorded. And what happened was these people who were in that meeting started saying, well, there was somebody named Jesse Spain who has that recording. Ask Jesse Spain for that recording. And there was this conspiracy kind of created out of thin air that somebody was in the meeting that wasn't registered or somehow recorded it and was sharing it with people. And there's still no official recording, and there's nobody named Jesse Spain that we're aware of. And it's just kind of this, they just obfuscate everything. They just make the truth. It's gaslighting. It's like it makes you feel crazy. Like, well, did Mary Ann hear what she said? They won't release the video for us to verify that. Now, she kept detailed notes, and right after the meeting, she wrote a great email explaining what happened and why she was offended. And we have that as evidence to what we know happened, but they still won't release that video. There's still no evidence of how deeply involved this Harold Ickes was in drafting this plan. And it was just consistently keeping Mary Ann Claytor and myself from being involved in any of the process, to the point where they had a retreat. There was this one instance where they had a meeting where they spent 2 hours discussing if there was a way to kick me and my sister off of the Indigenous Caucus. Could they get rid of us and get us off the AAC and get us out of the Indigenous Caucus by violating a code of conduct that they were going to create? They spent a lot of time on us trying to figure out how to silence us, because we were asking the simple questions. And let me just tell you that the simple questions, okay, we've kind of told all the official story. Let me go back to June of 2021 when I decided to go for the Indigenous Caucus. Selena Vickers, one of the people that I'll talk about quite a bit, she filed a grievance against Belinda Viafor that took place sometime in the middle of June of 2021. And in it, she discussed that she had put up somebody for parliamentarian against a Black woman, and the woman she had put up, or the person she put up, was an Indigenous person. And I had interactions with Selena, considered us to be kind of on speaking terms. So I wrote her that night and said, Selena, I have to say, it seems like you're checking boxes. You're kind of playing diversity tag. I don't know what you want to call it, where I went after this woman who's Black, but I put up this Indigenous woman, and you're using this identity politics as a white woman. And I told her I was offended by that. I think that kind of sullied my relationship going into the AAC, where she was heavily involved in the process. Leading up to the July 6th meeting, it was July 6th through the July 9th, where we actually had the elections for chair. Selena Vickers wrote every person who signed up for that meeting that wasn't named Sturm. I mean, that was in an email Marianne Clater sent, and a lot of the people in my caucus are like, "Who's this Selena person? She wants me to run for chair." And like a lot of the people I brought in, I said, "Come be part of this caucus because we're going to do something new." So she was trying. There were just these underhanded attempts before I even came in. So when we started all of this, there was all of these things going on that I wasn't privy to. So one of the first emails that I even received was an argument between the members, where there had been a list of demands sent to the leadership of the West Virginia Democratic Party, and the responses that they sent back were being shared with the group at large, but they had been filtered through the chairs and the secretary, Selena Vickers, and people were angry, saying, why would you think that you need to go over this before sharing it with us? But me being new, my first question was, who wrote the list of demands and why? Because the list of demands, if you look at them, everything was procedural. We want members on the Board of Appeals. We want these bylaws changed right away. Nothing seemingly that would benefit the AAC or our goal moving forward or any of the diversity caucuses. And nobody would answer me. And so there had been this, just ever since I came in, there was clearly something else going on, and I was unaware what it was. But if you look at what the AAC is now, we don't do the work that we were tasked with doing. There is no focus on increasing diversity or reaching out to different communities. The goal of the AAC and the sole mission is to fill at-large seats that we control, and it's a way for people who, in my opinion, let me preface with this with in my opinion, it was a way for those reformers on the MOU to have a way on the executive committee, knowing they can't win elections to get on. So one of the people, Selena Vickers, she called herself a lowly secretary last year. She also said that no one would step up to the plate, so she had to step up to lead the AAC, and she's now the co-chair of the AAC. And she's been the one orchestrating a lot of these racist attacks with Harold Ickes, and it's just kind of come full circle. And so, I'm kind of meandering, and I hope that I'm making sense with what I'm saying. But what we've been experiencing in this past year has been eye-opening, but it's not just in West Virginia. It turns out that what Harold's been doing here, he's done in other states. It started in Alabama. There's a lot of Black Democratic leaders in Alabama who are not happy with Harold Ickes. There are a lot of other southern states where apparently he's involved in different meetings and showing up in the way that he does in West Virginia. So what we saw here, it's already happened. Things are done. There's no way to prevent it. But it's a case study for a lot of other places moving forward, that this type of infiltration is common. They want to use the identities of Black, Indigenous, people of color to attack the establishment and say, these people are racist, they're no good, we are better. But they use the same tactics, the same heavy-handed approach, and even will resort to outright racism in order to get that power that they seek.
So, less of really a case of reformers and more of a case of, well, we've got a new machine now.
Exactly. And to be, the more conspiratorial folks in West Virginia have been convinced. I mean, people I talked to in 2016 said that these people were working with the DNC to basically rehab the Manchin name, knowing that Manchin was becoming toxic. How do you keep the corporate interest in the West Virginia Democratic Party if people are starting to turn against the head of the party. And so a lot of people are saying, and I don't know, I can't. To me, it's I don't want to be labeled a conspiracy theorist, but it seems that since that time it was led by these same people who have now taken over the party, who are just so happen to align with a lot of Joe Manchin's policies, and what we have is media saying there's something new here, and it's something to look at and be proud of. But what's the reality on the ground, and reality for a lot of people in West Virginia, is it's exactly the same. It's the same people. He fired Mike Pushkin, the new chair, came in, and he fired several people on staff, but he rehired people that were necessary from the previous administration, because they ran the books. They know how things are done, and he needed them. So the cosmetic changes that he's made in this is attempt to look more progressive. Behind the scenes, it's the same people, and even I don't know, just I don't know where to draw the line. I don't know. Some of the things affect me personally. They're not that interesting to other people, but I do think that there's a larger story here that people need to be aware of in regards to Harold Ickes and this group that I haven't mentioned yet, the People for Democratic Party Reform. I believe that they're manipulating rules and bylaws, which, if a lot of people, if you don't know this, Robert's rules are written in such a confusing way that they can be interpreted any way that you want to interpret. And yes. That's their mission. They want to manipulate the rules to get done what they want to get done. And a lot of minorities are at the receiving end of this, because they want to use our struggles to attack the establishment. And when somebody like me and Marianne Crater, we say, wait a second, we didn't sign up for this. Why are you doing this? We want other things. Our caucus doesn't necessarily want seats on the Board of Appeals. What's going on? Then we're attacked. I mean, there was the male chair of the AAC now, Shane Asadzandi, after the first meeting that I was in with the AAC in August of 2021, he planned a whole week of posts exposing me as an infiltrator working with Belinda Biaford to sabotage the AAC, and he had anonymous sources within the group. It was just sowing these seeds of discord. We never had the opportunity to work to accomplish what we were set out to accomplish, because there was always this fighting, and it was always laid at the feet of the minorities. Marianne Crater was the angry Black woman. I'm the violent, savage Indian, and all of these other people are just whoa. Why? And the other thing is, why are you clogging up our emails? And one of the first things I said was, why are we not establishing a Slack or a Discord or someplace where we can have full-on discussions with one another without clogging up emails? And there was no interest in that. So, it's because, and one of the other things that people have to understand is the level of detail that these people would go into. Every meeting was scripted, written out for the participants by Selena Vickers. I have a copy of the original script for the original Affirmative Action Committee meeting, where they nominated the chairs and these different positions, and everything's written out. And at the end, Selena types, "Don't share this with anybody." It's just for internal use. So everything that they presented, everything was well orchestrated to present this grassroots coming together. And as a matter of fact, one thing, if you look at the voting results from the last AAC election, everybody voted for the exact same people, despite multiple. There was a lot of nominations made that day, and given the fact that before I had come on to the AAC, they had been having private meetings where they would discuss. They called them workshops that weren't official meetings of the AAC. And so my guess is that the workshops are continuing. And as a matter of fact, there was a fellow who wrote Marianne Clater and said, what was it, and asked a question about one of the meetings that supposedly didn't happen right before that election. So there's collusion going on. When a quorum of a group meets and discusses business, that is an official meeting. And so what they're doing is they're holding illegal meetings under the guise of workshops, excluding members they don't trust or dislike, and making decisions moving forward so that whenever they go into these meetings that are already controlled and time limited for people to participate, everybody already knows what they're going to do. And there's no chance for the dissenting voices to even have a chance of changing minds.
Yeah.
There's already been hours-long meetings with these people discussing what they want to do.
It sounds like they're basically choreographing their side of things so that no one can really react to them because they're a step ahead because they have it all planned out, is what I'm hearing.
What Robert's rules, if you just go, and even the West Virginia Democratic bylaws allow for a certain amount of time for discussion. They limited our amount of time for discussion to, I believe it was 1 minute, 30 seconds, and then 1 minute for a follow-up. So the total amount of time we could discuss any given issue was 2 minutes and 30 seconds. And they're bragging that we took hours and hours to get the right language for this plan. If you want to ask questions about it, though, you've got 2 minutes. And, so it was. They say you did have it. So their official position is you did have input. You had the input when we put it before the whole committee, but it's just disingenuous and it's not true. What they did was no different than what Belinda Viafor and the previous administration had done in having all white people draft it. In this case, having Harold Ickes bring his plan from Alabama and kind of just copy paste that for West Virginia, and it worked. They've taken over. Harold Ickes was at the organizational meeting and donated $500 to the party after Mike Pushkin was elected chair. Selena Vickers, his go-to kind of cohort here in West Virginia, started a PAC called A New Day PAC and put $10,000 of her own money in. I don't know where she got it, but seems iffy. And the day of she had a meeting, I believe it was even in the same building, the morning of the organizational meeting for everybody who was elected and coming, the new members of the executive committee, where she laid out her vision of the future of the party and kind of gave them her slate of who to vote for. And it's just the amount of work and energy and money that has been put into this quote unquote grassroots effort to take down Joe Manchin is comical, because the grassroots organizers are being shut down, smeared, and maligned at every turn.
I'm going to go ahead and take a moment to catch up the chat now. We have a colleague, Leon Trotsky's Revolutionary Newsletter. Hey, how's it going? We have Joe Manchin's last primary challenger, Paula Jean Schweringen. Hi, Chris. Hi, Seth.
Hello,
hi, Paula. Glad you could join us. We have longtime friend of the show, Gira Brown. Hey, Chris, Seth, Paula Jean, and all. Now, this is worth commenting on. This type of chicanery is very familiar to supporters of the MPP petitioners and followers of the Colorado Green Party takeover by Andrea Marita Cuellar. Now, it's worth noting that the Colorado Green Party was taken over by Howie Hawkins' campaign manager, just in time for Howie Hawkins to become the Green Party nominee. And while there's a lot of different stuff going around, and my original source for Green Party chicanery has his own problems, suffice it to say that third parties have a lot of the same problems the Democrats do if they're not fundamentally a grassroots movement. As long as you've got people deciding things in rooms. And then Since you mentioned Mike Pushkin, I'm going to bring up Paula again because this is important. The new chair is a Manchin supporter. How is that holding Manchin accountable? I think that's a good question.
It's a great question. There is no difference in what the messaging that he gives the rank and file Democrats. There's the messaging that you give the diehards, the people who are in the party, and it's not changed. He is telling us the same exact things that Joe Manchin is. He's pushing the same things Joe Manchin is. His staff is filled with the same people that Joe Manchin's biggest ally, Belinda Beafor, had it staffed with. The only difference he made, he fired people who didn't support him, who didn't support his run for chair. Those are the people he fired. They were political retaliatory firings, and he is he epitomizes Joe Manchin and that style of West Virginia politics. That's what he embodies, and that's who he is. And the sad thing is that Mike Pushkin, in a very public way, told a series of lies about me personally and listed people that I've attacked that I actually have never attacked. And some of the people that I've supported, there's a man running for Congress by the name of Lacey Watson, and he's black and indigenous, and he's quite progressive. And yeah, he's a Democrat, and I liked Lacey Watson. I don't know if I still would say that now, but at the time, and I put out a lot of things in support of Lacey. And Mike Pushkin came out and told everybody that I was attacking Lacey Watson and making it seem like that I would attack anybody progressive, anybody black, anybody LGBTQ, wanted to make me out to be some sort of monster whenever that's the opposite. Like, the only reason I'm even involved with that party was to try to make it more inclusive. And it just got spun around. And the inability, we're in a 97% white state. I don't know. That's a guesstimate. It just, nobody cares about minority issues, from the media to the people in the party. It's just it's a nuisance to them. One person said about me, he's just overly sensitive. And it is. I mean, maybe I am. Maybe I'm overly sensitive to the racism that is so open and apparent and flamboyantly in our faces. Uh, it wasn't just me. The entire caucus walked away because of what we've experienced and what they've done. And
No, and them trying to make it about just you is sort of, the lie is proven by the whole caucus walking away, isn't it?
I would think so. We lost half of our membership or so right after that August 17th meeting, because the current chair of the AAC, male chair of the AAC, Shane Assad-Zondi, made a post targeting me and facilitated attacks on our caucus members, saying that we weren't legitimate, were we even indigenous, who did we represent, could anybody just, it was I believe it was over 400 comments, and it's still one of the only posts that's public on his Facebook profile. Everything else is private, but he keeps this post filled with lies and racist attacks up, and it caused a lot of people to walk away. It did a lot of damage to our caucus, and we honestly never recovered.
This is another good question. Did any of the supposedly progressive PACs attempt to work with your caucus?
No, we reached out. I've reached out to a lot of different organizations, and nobody wanted to be involved with anything that we were doing specifically. And I don't want to blame them for, I don't necessarily know that it's on their radar or that it was their responsibility, but nobody was interested in the story, and nobody's helped amplify it by any means. A lot of and people involved in those orgs actually are quite hostile in their response to me. I mean, the ACLU is not, a political organization ostensibly, but they have a reporter, investigative reporter by the name of William Kyle Bass, who does a lot of reporting for the West Virginia area, and he works for the West Virginia ACLU, and openly attacks me on Twitter for asking him to do a follow-up to his original story from 2021. He's one of the ones who covered the original racist implosion, who won't cover the story now. And whenever I said, I thought the ACLU would be interested in something like this, his response was, "What constitutional rights have been violated? Which of your constitutional rights have been violated?" And oh, yeah. And then I pulled from the website of the ACLU where they talk about racial discrimination. I'm sorry, I thought this was you guys. So these organizations are openly hostile to protect these newcomers and to and one thing I will say is that I think a lot of it comes down to they don't want to be responsible for another Trump, so to speak. In 2016, media was soft on Trump, gave him a lot of coverage, free publicity, and a lot of people blamed his win on that. And so I think that a lot of people in media overcompensate for that, and they don't want to be seen as anything other than towing the party line, and they want to make sure that they're responsible and getting and keeping the fringe from becoming mainstream. So they prop up what they believe to be the people in charge.
Yeah, but the media shouldn't be taking a partisan hand in local politics unless they're doing it with the best interests of the people at heart. And it doesn't sound like harassing the people trying to speak up for Black folks and Indigenous folks in West Virginia is the most productive way to do that.
You would think not, and it isn't. But it's just the idea that we're just props. Minorities are props, especially in places. And if you'll notice, I would dare say that this strategy that's been used here in West Virginia is going to be used in places where racism is more prevalent, and people are more susceptible to it. Because even people who believe that they're allies with people of color, they feel a sense of superiority. They feel that they have the right to talk down to them, infantilizing them. It's a consistent thing. Microaggressions from white people towards minorities. It's a consistent thing that we deal with on a daily basis of them letting us know where their status is versus ours. And in a small place like West Virginia, and when you're such a small portion of the population, it just kind of gets hyper focused on you, and it's pretty intense. There's not a lot of Indigenous people for them to direct their ire at, so it's me and my family, and because we're the ones who have caused them the most trouble. So it's just been a really awful experience from July when I took it on till yesterday when I walked away.
And well, with what Paul is saying, you've had to deal with no action plan from new leaders to create any sort of plan for minorities or disenfranchised communities. Let's see, it's up here. There was no effort to formulate a Poor People's Caucus or a Coalfields Caucus, even though I think if you're going with just white people and you're going to be racist, then you would still think that the poor people in Appalachia and the coal miners and their families would still be people you would want to give a voice to if you really care about bringing West Virginia together and being progressive.
There should have been a Poor People's Caucus based on the MOU, and it just never got formed. And new caucuses can be formed if there's so many petitioners and they present it to the executive committee and they have support of 75% of the voting members, some nonsense. You can get more caucuses involved, but I don't know. I don't know why they would want to be involved with that party.
And what Paul is saying, anyone that doesn't fall in line, get asked questions or talks back, gets attacked. I've seen some of that. I have seen people call Paula Jean deranged and a liar, and then I've seen other people use that exact same language against you or someone else. And it's like, you keep saying the same things about the people you don't like. It's kind of a tell.
And they never put out any evidence. I have Google Drive. I have, I've got multiple emails where I've taken up to 15 gigabytes where I save all of my emails and document everything that's been happening to me. And I have this all on, I have everything documented. If I say it, I will have proof of my claim. And I don't take it lightly. I don't like to, and I have made mistakes and I've admitted those mistakes. If I make a mistake, I will say that was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. But for the most part, I pride myself on the ability to only report the facts of what has happened to me or to other people that's been documented. I keep the rumors that I hear to myself, which are worse than what I'm telling, that I can prove. And those aren't my stories to tell. That's not my place. I can't verify them. I have no actual evidence. But I do have where, maybe Susan Miley, who that name means nothing to most people, but she's a member of the executive committee, and her husband is quite a big time lawyer in the North Central West Virginia region. He's on TV all the time. He's known as the Tiger. Susan Miley goes on afternoon of an email. I mean, just emailed me all afternoon one day, degrading me and my heritage and calling me too white to be Indian. How dare I question anyone's claims of indigeneity? Just nonsense that I shouldn't have had to deal with. And she was even at one point asking to talk to the people in my caucus, and I gave the people in my caucus her email, and several of them wrote her, and she didn't like it. They didn't have a pleasant conversation because they wanted to know why this random person wanted to talk to them. And but she spins it like, well, Seth's so horrible and I'm there for the actual members. And that's the story that she still continues to tell. And the actual members were offended by being contacted and questioned by this woman who didn't have our best interest at heart. She didn't care what we were doing one way or the other. She was looking for a way to attack me personally and to derail the work that we were doing.
It sounds like everybody with any sort of power or authority wants to be worshipped.
Yeah, that's yeah.
And I mean, people like to have their power, I suppose, but I don't know if wanting to be worshipped is a good quality in the quote unquote Democratic Party. Especially since, as you mentioned, Trump's desire to be worshipped was kind of a problem. And all these attempts to establish new cults of personality to outdo Trump on the Democratic side don't seem like they're going to help any.
No, it won't. And we're seeing something similar to that here, in West Virginia locally with that cult of personality around the new leadership. I mean, it's the people who are influential, who write the stories, the media folks. They're enamored with the people in power right now. I mean, the guy who is the chair had a woman come forward with accusations of emotional and psychological abuse that spanned a period of time of their relationship, and nobody covered it. Nobody seemed to care, and she was bullied, and I mean to the point where it was she suffered more consequences by trying to come forward than he suffered by doing what he did. And I don't like to mention her name. I don't want to bring it up in any way other than to say that that's what happens in West Virginia and probably other places, is that if you try to speak up and say I was victimized, you're going to be re-victimized by a gaggle of people who support
a cop, not just anybody off the street, a cop in a resort town in Ohio was charged with filing a false report when she tried to report her rape. Now, so we're not talking about an ordinary person. We're talking about a cop to whom different
Right.
rules usually apply, and to people to whom people bend over backwards to try to empower. But no, this was a woman, and a black woman at that, in a resort town in Ohio, and so the police decided we'll charge her with a false report.
Right. No, there is always going to be extra scrutiny on women and people of color. And there's a lot of intersectionality of the two, and that's
And,
that's
and let's
that's
add poor to that, because
right.
I know for a fact, because I've seen some of it. I know for a fact that poor people are never included in that club. Not unless they somehow use it to get rich, in which case they're welcomed because they owe everybody else.
Right.
But unless you're willing to compromise your ethics to become rich, poor people aren't welcome. Working people aren't welcome.
No, no, absolutely not. There's a barrier in place to keep them from participating or being involved in any way. The only people who are able to have any kind of say are well-connected people who, kind of already know each other, and this they protect each other. And so anybody new, fresh comes in, you're going to get destroyed by the cliques that are already existing, and
Or
that's
co-opted into one.
exactly a lot. There's a lot of people that came into this with good intentions, and we're doing a lot of good work. And then the second that they get elected, or the second that they get into the club, they all of a sudden their rhetoric changes completely, and they're no longer the person that they were. And that's just you know that's why people like me, people like Mary Ann Claytor, we don't get into the club because we are too contrary. We want everyone in on the secret. We don't want people we want people to understand what's going on. Here's something that I like to point out. People love sports. People love sports, and they love, drama. They love reality television. If politics doesn't hit all of those same primal responses in your brain, it's because it's not being reported in a way that intrigues people. It's reported as something boring and not
Well,
interesting,
and
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 people need to be involved.
when it is reported in a way that's intended to get people thinking of politics like sports, they go just a little too heavy into the sports and don't actually talk about what matters, but they talk about personalities and stories and performance, and not about promises kept and broken.
Right, and that's to me that's you have to where is the ability to get regular people to care? We have evidence for days about what's happened in West
Yeah.
Virginia. We've been telling the story over and over again to have people who will listen, and it doesn't matter. You know, I'm openly attacked by people who should be doing follow up stories and saying, "Hey, same thing is happening to minorities in West Virginia that happened in 2021, and nobody's doing anything about it." There's this group of people who feel left out, abandoned, disenfranchised, disaffected, and they want attention from the outside world because in racist West Virginia they're just tossed aside, ignored, and that's that. And so that's why I'm so thankful that you had me on to let people hopefully outside of West Virginia in on this because it's not just here; it's happening in other places, and it's that abuse of power that white people use to take and manipulate and kind of steal the identity. I don't know. It's a form of blackface. They want to steal the identity and the struggle of minorities and make it their own, so that they can use that
Like
for their
like when the president of the United States, who as a senator passes co-sponsors an amendment that essentially ends Brown versus Board of Education as we know it in America, gets up during his presidential campaign and says, I marched with Dr. King. No, you didn't, Joe. You didn't march with Dr. King. You were in Delaware.
Right. And it's those lies that they're able to just get away with, and people rah, that's our team, and that's our leader. We got to hold those people accountable and say, what's wrong with telling somebody who's full of it that they're full of it. Like, we all have skin in the game. There are people dying every day because these people don't take their job seriously. They don't act with enough urgency, and the blood is on their hands. So why should we?
They don't care about saving lives.
Right.
Let's be honest.
Right. So why do I have a responsibility to behave civilly when I'm talking to them or about them, whenever they don't have the civility to even care about the health and safety of the people they're supposedly representing?
The number one rule of this relationship that you're describing is that civility is for the little people when approaching the people with a position of authority. Civility to me is code for the deference that people of a higher position expect from people they see as beneath them.
Exactly. And if you dare to even speak to somebody as though you're equals, I mean, that alone is a sin. I don't need to name, like there was a certain journalist that I got into it with where that was essentially the basis of it, was just that kind of a personal thing. And
it doesn't help that journalist repeated language that had clearly been fed to him by someone else, and he repeated it uncritically. Because again, it's exactly the same language that was being used to criticize Paula in 2016 and 2018. I'm sorry, 2016 and 2020.
Right. 2018 and 2020.
2018 and 2020, you're right.
Right.
2018 and 2020. And when that language gets repeated, they're talking from the script because they pull it out. And so when they're talking about Bernie Sanders, it's, oh, he's an old white man. And then they're talking about people they don't like in West Virginia, deranged liar. And then they're talking about Nina Turner in Ohio, who I'm not a big fan of, but who gets treated really badly by Clinton Democrats because she was one so recently when she first went to work with Bernie Sanders in 2016. And that's she's not really loyal to her community. She's loyal to Bernie, not black people. Stuff like that. And you hear the way they talk about people like that. And whenever they can, they put it in the mouth of someone who maybe has some sort of business saying something like that. But often it's coming from people involved in politics who just shouldn't be going there. Like when Joe Biden says, if you don't vote for me, then you're not black.
Right. And and those people never seem to understand that that's a problem. But I support black people. I am the best choice for. They believe that, but what they don't understand is that there's an entire personhood and a complex thought process behind the community where they're not owed anything. You're not. The Democrats aren't owed anybody's vote, and you see that. And a lot of times, whenever you look at the numbers, like from 20, whenever Trump won. I mean,
yes,
a lot of black men didn't turn out to vote. They just didn't vote, and we put the blame on all these other things. We're not engaging with these communities. They know that what they're selling is a lie. That they'll tell them whatever to get elected, and that they take them for granted. How many times is it? Well, who else you going to vote for? The Republicans, and that's what's got to change. The minorities in this country, we do have power. And if we could kind of stop the Democrats from abusing us and actually use that power I don't like the Democrats, don't get me wrong, but those that are within the Democratic Party, rather than acquiescing to the leadership and becoming what they protest against, if they were to coalesce and do something meaningful, then maybe there could be reform. But there's none of that happening. You don't see it happening.
The structure of the Democratic Party makes that almost impossible. Because, I mean, what do you want to do in the Democratic Party? You want to run for governor. Okay, if you want to run for governor, then you have to have a bunch of people in the state owe you favors and be willing to support you because they owe you favors.
Right.
You want to run for Congress. Okay, you want to run for Congress, you got to prove you can raise money. And more than that, if you get elected to Congress, then you have to join the party telemarketing machine, where even if you never take a dime of DCCC money yourself, you've got to spend 8 hours a day raising money for the DNC from millionaires. And that's what they're doing. They're calling millionaires up all day and say, hey, could you give us some more money to do this? And not all millionaires are bad people. There are some people who really do try to do their best, even if they have money. I won't, but there's always a but attached, and that but is millionaires don't understand how the rest of us actually live, no matter how good they are or well-meaning they are. Unless they actually take time to unplug from living as millionaires to experience our life, they won't get it.
No, they can't get it, and their attempts to solve our problems never come. That's kind of the thing, is if you don't have the perspective of living it, you have very little business commenting on it or trying to make policy regarding it. And that's why it's important to have the diverse voices within any party apparatus, Green Party, Democratic Party. And you have to have those voices at the ground level, be part of the apparatus. Otherwise, you end up with what we have, which is just...
And the dirty secret, of course, I don't know how much of a secret it is to some people, but the dirty secret is the politicians don't know what anything costs because they haven't paid for anything themselves for years.
Yeah, absolutely. There's this one person here in West Virginia, and I don't want to name names because I have not verified this yet, but this person has a security guard that they pay for out of campaign funds. And it's possible that they're paying this person during the for protecting them during legislative session and during official business, which, that's not exactly, where what campaign finance is rarely enforced, but we're seeing ethical violations of the use of the money that is being donated to people, and that's what happens. People take that, and that support that they get is often financial, and they use that to live the best life. And even if you don't pay yourself, just being able to go and rub elbows with people that you think are influential and going to their 5-star dinner parties or whatever, that's something, and that's something to hold on to them. And corruption comes in many forms. It doesn't mean you take payment to be a corrupt person. It just means I really like what I got and I don't want to give it up. So I compromise my values to keep it. And I think that's the majority of people. That's the problem, is that they got a taste of it, they like it, and they don't want to lose it.
And our society tells people that that's the American dream. That's what you're supposed to want. That's what you're supposed to be trying to get. So nobody feels like they're selling out, really, when they grab onto that. They're taking their chance.
Right, and they believe that they'll be the one to do good with that position. Exactly. I got that position because I deserve it, and boy, I'm going to show people what I can do with it. Exactly. But there's always going to be that thing. Well, I got to do this first, and then I'm going to do that other thing, because maintaining your position comes first. I mean, I think not to criticize like AOC and all of that, but she went from talking about being the one. You can't be scared to be a one-term politician.
So
to being.
I will redirect this a little. not that I want to let AOC off the hook, but I think there are people with more power who have been in Congress longer who deserve more attention on this.
Absolutely.
Pramila Jayapal is the leader of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And her behavior in that role has been as a disgraceful sidekick to Joe Biden, who says whatever she thinks the administration wants her to say and talks about what great things we've accomplished with terribly small victories. And who talks about what a great president she thinks Joe Biden is. Now, this is the person who became chairman of the Congressional Progressive Caucus because she was going to change the way things were done and stop following the party line. Where is any of that?
Right. No, it doesn't happen. Once you're in, and listen, I don't know. If I got elected into Congress and got a taste of it, I might become the biggest hypocrite you've ever seen. I can't say because it's never happened to me. Because it happens to the best of them. I mean, there are a lot of people that go in with good intentions and just kind of get lost in the quagmire. I mean,
let's be completely honest about who John Lewis was. The John Lewis who went into Congress was not the John Lewis who had been in Congress for 20 years.
Right.
Elijah Cummings, another really high-profile person who did a great deal of good as an activist outside of politics, but who became another person who had been in Congress for 20 years after being in politics.
Right. No, there's a clear institutional problem as well, and honestly, it's above my pay grade. I don't know the answers to a lot of these questions and the problems that we face, other than to say that I know we are failing the people who need us the most. When I say we, I mean they, the legislators, the lawmakers, the leaders of this country, the leaders of our states are failing the people that they're supposed to be representing and the people they're supposed to be governing.
I live in Oregon. This is a blue state. This is a state that's been a reliable blue state for a long time. Our outgoing governor, is a corporate drone who was too quick to raise COVID restrictions on at least two occasions, and as a result made the pandemic worse when it didn't have to happen. The same as Andrew Cuomo has very publicly been exposed as doing, and everyone appears to have forgotten.
Right.
And so the mayor of Portland, which is the big city just not too far away here, is one of the worst Clinton /Bloomberg /Biden police state Democrats in the country. Our cops are horrible, and our mayor is the police commissioner in addition to being the mayor.
Well, there in 2020, when all of the protests were going on, the Portland was one of my areas where I was focusing a lot of my attention because it was so interesting to me, and the mayor's response and the crackdowns that came. At the time I was doing a podcast. And those episodes are long gone, but I did an entire episode dedicated to the mayor in Portland at the time because of the double, how the major crackdown and the support of the police in a moment when that's not what was needed, in my opinion. And I think that she made things worse at that time.
Mm.
And so.
Yeah, the mayor we have now, Tear Gas Ted Wheeler, is, I mean, you could caricature him as a Republican easily. We have terrible, terrible cops. We have a big problem with racism in our establishment. The city cops are buddies with Patriot Prayer and the Proud Boys. The previous police chief, well, a couple police chiefs ago now, because there was a real comedy trying to replace her too. But our former police chief, Daniel Outlaw, was either pressured into resigning or quietly fired. It's not super clear which, because of a scandal in which her riot cops were exchanging text messages with Patriot Prayer during an anti-ICE protest, where Patriot Prayer got very violent with the anti-ICE protesters, and the cops sort of helped them. And so she was gone, and then she was immediately hired in Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia has its own reputation for institutional racism, so it doesn't shock me that they hired a police chief whose cops were palling around with white supremacists and exchanging text messages with them during protests where the white supremacists were harming and killing protesters. But it's just this comedy of unforced errors where the person who replaced her then quit himself and was replaced by someone else, whereas Danielle Outlaw just saunters into the job as police commissioner in Philadelphia without missing a beat, no problems. She's still got a career, even though she was in the middle of a big Portland scandal. I'm willing to bet that most people in Philadelphia don't know why she lost the job in Portland.
Wow. Right. And that's the kind of shuffling that always protects those types of predators, from the Catholic Church into the bureaucratic, governmental type jobs. And especially with the police, there is that brotherhood and that thin blue line that they don't cross whatsoever. They protect one another. And,
let me suggest that it is also fear, like a mafia code of silence, where people really fear the consequences if they cross that line.
True.
Police whistleblowers have been killed. People who testify against cops have been killed. In that, the Dallas cop who was, no, sorry, not Dallas, Austin. The Austin cop who went to prison for killing the man who she claimed was in her apartment when she had really walked into his and killed him.
Right, right.
One of the main witness against her was shot under mysterious circumstances after the trial and is now dead.
Right.
You've got to assume that was cops. Obviously, I can't prove it, but I mean, what's the logical conclusion to draw from that?
Listen, I believe that a lot of what we see in law enforcement is just a brotherhood of it's the largest criminal organization in the country.
I mean, if the good cops arrested the bad cops and got credit for it, then Frank Serpico would have retired as the New York chief of police instead of the way he actually retired.
Right. No, it's the idea that how do you can't reform a system that protects itself in that way, and the problem is at such a large scale that what do we do? And it almost seems like all of these institutions have made these complications to the point where we're living in this society where we don't have a lot of options to escape the tyranny that they force upon us, and there's not a lot of room for us to navigate any kind of life outside of what we're forced into, and that's one of the most depressing things. And I don't know. To me, it's I want to see the revolution by any means necessary. I want to see the total collapse of our institutions. If you're asking me personally, I'm an indigenous activist. I believe colonialism in our way of government is is a vestige of the genocide that was waged against my people. I believe there's a better way forward, and I think that the institutions we have now propagate racism, and they kill millions of people every year.
At the very least, we need an America that honors its treaties with indigenous people. At the very least, what would be better would be an America that actually issues a new social contract that includes Black and indigenous people.
Yes.
Instead of the one that has traditionally excluded them, which America is repeatedly unwilling to do.
Right. And you know, I don't mean to make it sound like, you know, a violent person with what my beliefs are. I just believe the institutions that we have are racist, and that they need to be changed fundamentally. And until they are, we're going to be in this situation that we're in.
If you ask me what my ideal situation would be, get rid of America, and we all draw up a new social contract together. In
an ideal world,
with preferably with Black people and indigenous people taking the lead.
Yeah. And as somebody mixed race, listen, there are much more qualified people than me. I don't want to be the spokesperson for indigenous people. I don't view myself as that. You know, there's been a lot of that talk, but I became that in West Virginia because there was no one else who stepped up. There was no one else willing to do that. And I've been, you know, I don't want to be seen as somebody who capitalizes on their indigenous heritage. You know, I don't want people to think that that's who I am. There are a lot of people who should be leading, who come from tribes and places that have experienced things that me living in West Virginia, looking like I do, I haven't experienced. So, you know, I don't want people to mistake my activism as some sort of self-aggrandizement and a way for me to capitalize on my heritage by any means.
I can understand that. I don't want to try to capitalize on anybody else's heritage the way that the machine appears to like to do. I want to give everybody a chance to talk for themselves.
Right.
I really appreciate you joining me tonight, Seth. I want to thank you for that. I want to thank everybody who's been watching and who's participated in the chat. Seth, do you have any final thoughts before I close this out?
No, I would just encourage everybody to, you know, follow Marianne Claytor on Twitter, because she's an up-and-comer. If anybody's going to make a difference in West Virginia, it is Marianne Claytor. She has my utmost respect, and I think everybody should follow her. And of course, thank you to like you and Paula Jean and like everybody that's you know been there and supporting and amplifying our story here. It means a lot. It really does.
And I want to thank everybody who joined us to watch tonight. It's always good when we have a lively chat, so that really helps. I do want to say, because I noticed a couple people asking about it in the chat, Alex isn't going to be on the show anymore going forward. I'm not going to say why. He's going to be doing other projects. I'm doing other projects. That's all I'm going to say. It's private. We're cool. He's my comrade. He's always been a good comrade to me. We're just not doing this together anymore. For the people who asked. And for my final thought, I think you can do worse than follow the Seth Sturm on Twitter. I'm going to put that in the chat. And also, I mean, if you're not following Paula Jean already, you should be at Paula Jean 2020.
Absolutely.
There are lots of great voices to follow on Twitter, but also, talk to people in your neighborhood. I try to talk to Lyft drivers about communism sometimes. I try to talk about communism to coworkers just casually, just to make people think about it a little more. Do things to try to, if you're an anarchist, talk to people, ask people questions. If you're a communist, talk to people about some of the ideas behind communism without mentioning communism. Just whatever you can do to get people used to the idea of actually being there for their neighbors when the time comes, because we're going to need it soon. A right winger was gloating on social media the other day that they have all the guns. So what do they care if there's a civil war? And it's worth thinking that we need to keep that in mind in our neighborhoods and communities and be there for each other when we need each other. And that's my final thought. And I hope everybody has a great night. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll tweet at you.